Are you truly living a life that is authentic to you, a life that you want, right? And if you can't answer that question, think about the ways that you can, right? So, how are you being intentional? How are you manifesting exactly the life that you have, right? And how is what you do, right? How the people you surround yourself with, community supporting that or keeping you away from that life that you want.
Welcome to Small Acts of Rebellion, a podcast where the unspoken narratives at the intersection of our personal and professional lives come to light. I'm your host, Heather Pridemore, your guide on this journey of discovery and defiance. Join me as we uncover the rebellious spirit that shapes our careers and lives. It's time to own your story. Are you ready? Today's guest is Dr. Violeta Garcia, who is on a mission to reimagine what is possible and how we live our lives to be in the right relationship with change. As a scientist, she gained an appreciation for the power of nature as our teacher. She uses concepts in ecology, systems change, and systems engineering to inspire leaders to design the life they want to live and to create organizations where BIPOC leaders can thrive. Nationally and locally, Dr. Garcia is a sought-after bilingual content expert and an influential connector who facilitates collaboration and partnerships among industry, education, and community stakeholders. As a systems engineer, she loves disrupting outdated ways of thinking and believes every person should have access to high-quality, culturally relevant, and culturally responsive learning experiences. Dr. Garcia believes that companies have an amazing opportunity to transform workplace cultures where every person can thrive and has decided to dedicate her life to this important work. Her educational training, coupled with her 20 plus years of work experience, have created a quilt of skills that she now uses to help our communities rise together. Dr. Garcia is a Latina executive, a bilingual educator, a skilled facilitator, a trainer, and a cultural influencer. She has led multiple efforts to revamp, create, and implement strategic plans for organizations, school district initiatives, and educational programs. A native of El Salvador and currently resides in Denver, Colorado, with her 2 children and her partner. Welcome to the show, Dr. Violeta.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heather. This is wonderful.
So I always love to tell people how I met my guests. And I think that the way we met Dr. Violeta, excuse me, is so indicative of what we're going to talk about today. And so you and I met at a networking community sponsored event, and you were kind enough to come over and engage me in a conversation. And that led to an invitation and more networking events. And honestly, because of you, I've made new friends and been able to connect with other entrepreneurs and professionals. And so I think it's just so relevant to the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yes, I remember I think I was preparing lunch and I looked over and you were sitting there working and there's an energy that attracted me to you and I said I have to get to know this person. I'm not sure why yet, but I will figure it out. And we sat together and we just had a wonderful conversation and it really started with tell me about yourself. Just want to know who you are. And then we found all these synergies after that. So that's such a beautiful way where we often think we have to have an agenda when we meet people, and that's the beauty in just getting to know each other as human beings, is just saying, you know what, tell me what's going on in your life, what's important to you, and then so many amazing things happen from that.
Yeah, you have such a wonderful community around you, Dr. Violeta, and it's so nice to not only get to spend time with you periodically, but in each of those times that we engage, getting to meet new and interesting people who do new and interesting things. And so I'm really grateful that you took the time to introduce yourself and to get to know me, because it's led to everything that's transpired since then. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, and imagine if we actually did that once a day, every day, how many
I know,
amazing
how
new connections we
powerful.
would make.
Yeah.
Right.
So powerful. So there's a challenge for everyone every day. Just
Mhm.
take the time to introduce yourself to someone new, because you never know where there's going to be a powerful connection.
Yes, absolutely. And a key question I like, if I'm sitting next to somebody, I make eye contact and I'm like, "Hi, how are you? How are you today?" And that's because we often, when we're asked that question, we think, "I'm fine," right? But it's like, "How are you today?" To actually really think about that. And then it's like, "Tell me more." Right? Those probing questions, and people open up all the time. I mean, to the point where they tell me stories that they would probably won't even tell their own partners, or their own parents. So I think that it's that art of listening sometimes that really helps people feel safe.
For sure, for sure.
Mhm.
I think there's asking questions is such an underrated skill, right? Like, I mean, it serves so many great purposes. And I think living life with a sense of curiosity has a lot of, unexpected but positive outcomes.
Yes, and I'm a big reader. I read about voracious reader might be a better word. I read about 100 books a year. Okay, I do listen to some of those because just I transition a lot between different things. And two books that really have stood out that really resonate with this. You're going to walk away with a whole list of books by the end of this conversation. But one is A More Beautiful Question and The Art of Listening. That's the one I'm actually finishing up. And I thought, wow, that's something I can get better at. And that I actually do really well too. And why people feel that they can trust me because I listen to what they have to say and also help them whenever they do ask for help them figure things out in terms of what's best for them, not what I want them to do. I just kind of coach them.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I I'm going to be launching a book club later this year, and I may have to add one of those books to the syllabus of books to ask because I think question asking is so important, and I haven't read either of them. So
Oh, wonderful.
thank
Hmm.
you for the recommendation.
Definitely.
Now, one of the things that stood out to me, Dr. Violeta, is one is the way you communicate, but also when you're communicating, there are some themes that kind of stand out
Hmm.
to me. And so, as I've come to different things and we've had different conversations, some of those themes are what I call the three M's. So, mindset, manifestation, and money. And I want to clarify when I say
Hmm.
manifestation, I'm not talking like woo woo. Like, what
Hmm.
I always find really interesting about conversations with you, Dr. Violeta, is that when you're talking, even concepts that might feel a little woo woo or spiritual or whatever, you're able to ground them in a really like very pragmatic way. And so what I really want to talk to you about is like, what do you think mindset, manifestation, and money reveal about our values and the stories that we tell ourselves? And then I'm also curious how this has shown up both for you and then maybe also with some of the clients that you work with.
I think it's a beautiful question, right? When we look at it that way, because we show up in the world in a way that we don't even notice because we haven't taken the time to listen to ourselves, right? So when I ask someone, how are you doing? And the first thing that comes out of their mind is overwhelmed, that tells me a lot about where they are in their mindset, in how they're manifesting, right? And in their money stories too, because that word overwhelm, I feel overwhelmed is almost a debilitating idea, but so many of us, it feels like the truth, right? So for me, I remember thinking, what there was a moment in my last executive position that I thought, why is it that I feel overwhelmed? I had that moment. I was that woman, right? And standing in that truth at that moment where I'm like, this is crazy. Not only was I overwhelmed, but I was losing my hair and I had gained about 40 pounds from the stress because I was creating that story without even knowing that I was creating that story. I thought it was other people. I thought it was my board chair. I thought it was society. I managed an organization that had 17,500 members. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's no way I can't feel overwhelmed. This is ridiculous, right? The organization was in debt and all these different things. The tools that I did not have, though, were coaching, were intentionality, and just calming myself down, right? And so then I said, you know what? My life is too valuable for me to just throw it away right now and be at the mercy of another a board for that matter, right? Telling me what to do, or even worse, not feeling aligned with my own values. And with that comes how community is of utmost importance to me. I serve community, and if something doesn't align with that, I am not living with that intentionality that I want. So I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, if I'm not living with that intentionality, I'm not being true to myself. And because I'm not being true to myself, I'm creating these results. I'm creating my own hair loss. I'm creating my own overwhelm. I'm creating my own inauthenticity, if you look at it that way, right? I was not being true to myself. And so I said, I wrote a letter. It was like, it came out of nowhere. And I said, you know what? this is what's happening in this organization. If you want me to lead this organization, this is what I want, right? I want to be able to talk to community, for the community to get us out of this, mess. And they already had an agenda. And I said, and if you go with that, that's okay. I'm just not your leader, and I'll leave here. And I stepped down. I literally stepped away. And I remember walking away from a position. I was the executive director for the organization. And I said, you know what? I only get one life, and I don't want to surrender to give up my life for this organization that doesn't even value, it doesn't even care about how I'm doing, right? Doesn't even ask me how I'm doing. Truly, to really, really, truly to listen to the answer. So I left and I said, you know what if I actually created something with intentionality to help, especially women of color? The tools that I use are helpful for every single person, but I center on women of color. And you mentioned the word BIPOC. So for those listeners that don't know, Black, I always use Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, because there's this dynamic of whatever impacts a woman, when you have those intersections of identity, and we can think of other intersections that marginalize us as well, right? It's even worse for those layers, right? For the people that carry those identities around. So I have decided to focus on that one area, which is more ethnic diversity, because I'm that woman, right? I was that woman that had that intersection, and they hired me thinking, oh yeah, look, we have a woman of color, check, without giving me any supports on what it means to be the first, on what it means when a funder talks to the white man who's still there, right? And I'm the director, but they're not looking at me, they're looking at him, right? All those different tools. And so part of this was, what can I create that incorporates those three ands? What can I create that truly builds a system where a woman of color could have a mindset that works for her, right? Manifest that, and really truly say, what is it that I want? Because whether it's good or bad, we're creating that result by the actions we take. And that also comes with financial freedom. That if I can't figure out how to manage my finances, I'm always going to live under this story that I need somebody else to give me something in order for me to thrive and to live.
Oh, there's so many juicy things to talk about there, Dr. Violeta. So, the first thing I want to just take a step back on is you were talking about how your mindset was manifesting itself physically.
Mhm.
And so, I think that that's just worth pointing out and calling out because you're not the first person who's come on this show and talked about, physical
Mhm.
manifestations of stress or burnout or, any of those things. And I think that it's something that we don't talk enough about. We often try to address the symptom, which if we're feeling physical pain or losing our hair or gaining
Mhm.
weight, we don't typically think about the fact that that could be coming from something mental. And we're always like, okay, well, how do I fix like the pain or the, whatever the ailment is.
Mhm.
So we tend to be a little bit like symptomatic. And so I just think it's really interesting in your own story that this kind of manifested that way for you. And I mean, what a gift to realize that that's what the problem was, too.
Well, and I didn't even realize it when I was there. I just
Hmm.
remember thinking, I'm going to stand in my power. I really didn't even know what that meant what that meant, like physically, right? I said, I'm just going to put it out there. Whatever they say, I'm willing to take the consequence. And if that means this is my last day in this job, I'm willing to do that. But then later on, when I went through coaching school, that was when I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, I was creating that result and I didn't even know it because I didn't have those tools, right? And part of me identifying how it was connected to weight loss is when we went through the coaching program, we were asked to pick an area that we wanted to focus in to learn all the concepts, right? When it came to our thoughts and our emotions and how we create certain results just by what we allow, right, in our lives. And I decided to choose weight loss. So, I actually want to focus on weight loss. And because there was nothing else wrong with me. Like, there are no hormonal issues, there is no other things. It was just I kept eating to avoid an emotion, right? And that emotion showed up as shame many times because I didn't want them to, an imposter syndrome, right? Because it was like, I didn't want them to know that I didn't know what the heck I was doing, right? And I was trying my best. And so I was just, I would almost hide it through food. And just like, I would eat when I was nervous. I would eat when I was celebrating. I would eat, all these different things. And I started saying, wait a minute, what if I didn't have to eat? What if I actually just allowed that emotion? That was life changing. So people ask me, what did you do? What diet did you do? And I said, I just learned to manage my mind. And that's how I lost the weight.
That's really powerful. I So much of that I can relate with, as far as like, I mean, if you think about even just celebrations culturally, many cultures celebrate with food, right? And
Mhm.
in my own life as a kid, anytime we did something good, or we were well behaved, or we got a good report card, or, you know, whatever it was, there was some sort of like food reinforcement. I mean,
Mhm.
not to say it this way, but it's kind of like when you give a dog a treat, you know, for sitting. And so like my whole sort of, you know, like behavioral stuff was just constantly positively reinforced with food. And
We
it
Oh my
creates a
gosh,
bad like relationship.
Heather, it's so bad. We will bribe kids with dessert after they eat their meal, right? I mean, we're reinforcing food with food. I mean, it just makes no sense, right? And we do it.
Totally, totally. Now, the other thing I wanted to kind of pull out a little bit more is you started talking a little bit about the reason that this is so specifically important for like BIPOC women.
Mhm.
And we just had someone on the show recently who talked about the intersection of being a person of color, of generational trauma, of, you know, existing in places that systems that aren't designed for women, for people of color, like, and the result is ultimately corporate masking, which then eliminates a lot of the authenticity and sometimes feelings of autonomy, right? And
Yeah.
individuality. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more, Dr. Violeta, on that particular topic, because it sounds like it kind of
Yeah.
intersects with some of your experiences as well.
It does, and, one of the things that in my former job, when I worked for the government, it manifested in I started believing my own marginalization story. That I didn't deserve something, or that I was too loud, or that I was too this and that. And now I own it. I'm like, yeah, I'm loud. Watch out. You just know that I'm loud. I'm like, yep, that's how I talk, right? So it's this dynamic of balancing what is true to you. What do you want to be true for you, right? So, for example, I remember being in a project when I left the government, and there was another person. My supervisor was another person that had a marginalized identity, and he used that as a weapon, to say, I know what a minority is because I am, a gay man. And I'm like, your experience as a gay white man is has nothing to do with my experience as an ethnic minority in this space when I'm the only Latina, right? So it's just a different experience, but he kind of used it as a guise to almost attack in different ways, right? But then, for example, some of my behaviors that I thought I wish I had the tools, where I started avoiding him. I started not communicating anymore. And then I started kind of building resentment, right? And I think about that. That was all on me, and now I'm thinking, oh, what if I actually would have spoken up to say, I can't finish this project if you don't give me the information I need? And instead, culturally, I was taught to stay quiet, right? I was taught to not be a problem. I was taught to, there's a saying in Spanish, calladita te ves más bonita. Quiet, you look prettier, right? I mean, right? So all of that, there's a couple of layers. It's almost like how we've been socialized to not speak up, and also understanding that a way of being raised is not a truth I want today for my own life and for my children. So my kids have a very different way. And I have a story, Heather. Oh my God, it showed up in a such a blatant way with my daughter that I was almost shocked, that and so proud of her at the same time, right? I was like, did she just say that? So my parents were visiting this past week, and they love watching Spanish television, old movies, all sorts of like that nostalgia. They pull it out. And my mother said, oh, why don't you have the girls come watch TV with us? And my daughter, she's right there, and she said, Grandma, she goes, I don't watch racist things, and I don't watch things that put down women. And I was sitting there like cheering her, but I'm like, I never would have had that bravery, that courage to say that to my parents growing up. And the shows that they were watching were making fun of indigenous people. In the Latino community, very common. There's a lot of colorism. There's a lot of anti-indigeneity. when we are literally indigenous. I mean, it's one of those things, but it's like, nope, proximity to whiteness was kind of what people strive for. My passport says I'm white. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is so wild when that identity just doesn't even resonate given the experience I have in the US. Very different. But in El Salvador, I have privilege because I'm a fair skinned Latina. Right. But my daughter saying that, I mean, you're hitting the spot on that, right? So it's almost deciding what truths do we want? What reality do we want to create for ourselves? And my daughter has decided that, guess what? I am not going to be part of a system that puts down people of color, right? Because we have been like, I know my worth, right? And the fact that you're watching these programs is perpetuating that same inequity. And we do that in the workplace too, right? I mean, it just really resonates with that. It's like the behaviors we allowed. I literally should have called myself out last, what, 2 nights ago or so. We were in a sisterhood event, okay? And there's a white man that shows up to the event and takes up all the space. It's like, oh, we're opening up to the audience to ask questions. And he goes on about all about himself. And I'm like, why are you even speaking? And nobody said, hey, this is a space where we are asking questions that relate to women and women's issue in this in relationship to this topic. Sit down. Nobody said it. There were 50 women there. So calling myself out, right? And holding myself accountable to that, saying, wait a minute, we're not going to give you time. And it goes back to white privilege shows up that way, in a way that's like, he was entitled to that space. Didn't even question it, right? Never looked in the room that there's 50 women and that he's the one. So for us to be able to stand up in a way that doesn't come across as like, oh, we're being rude, that is a muscle we have to continue working with, because it comes across even other women of color. It's like, oh no, we don't want to march it. We don't want to put down white men. And I'm thinking, yeah, except that we're also not centering the community that we say we care about right now. And that's women. We weren't even centering women at that moment, right? So it comes across that way in the workplace. And that's something that I have to think about. What is it that I truly want to stand up for, right? That those values that I want to keep consistent in all aspects of my life. And what are the things that, you know what? They're the little clouds, the circumstances that I don't even care. Like, if somebody's always going to say something, do I spend time? Do I spend my energy fighting that battle? I can't change their thoughts and I can't really change who they are, but I can influence other things, which is like, you know what? I'm going to influence the fact that I'm going to point out, hey, did you notice you just said blah, blah, blah? Right? Did you notice? I have power over that to show people what their language is doing, and just leaving it at that. Right? And they're like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. Oh, tell me more. How did you mean it? Right? But if we can't stay regulated, then it becomes across as the angry woman, right? It comes across as a loud person who never allows other people to talk. And I'm just like, what if I regulate my mind to really get the point across in a way that really shows them their true colors, right? But still staying true to who I am.
One of the things I really hear in there, Dr. Violeta, is boundaries.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily like the main topic of what we're discussing, but what I
Right.
hear within that dialogue is boundaries. And I think that that's a good segue to start talking about things like intentionality and
Mhm.
self-advocacy,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of what you're saying, right, in mindset and making these choices for ourselves is about having intentionality about our values and our boundaries, and then saying, based on these factors, this is what's going to happen for myself. This is what I'm going to do for me, because me is what I can control, right? Self.
Yeah.
It all comes back to self. And so I really want to talk a little bit more about that. And so, in your opinion, what does living with intentionality and advocating for yourself look like when it comes to taking control of your time and defining life on your terms?
I think the connection and the bridge is so powerful right here, right? Because it goes back to my intentionality is I am not going to put myself in a situation that goes against my values. And when I do, I'm going to exit that system, right? The reality is, I don't need to give people my time, my energy, when I know they're not going to value me for who I am as a person, right? And so we also get to choose. And I mean, we see it right now with Michelle Obama. I got to name it, right? To say my boundaries, my my husband might have to be there, but I don't have to be there for this inauguration. I am protecting my peace, my tranquility. So that's something else too, that when I think about intentionality is I literally have one life to live, right? Why am I going to waste it trying to please other people? Why am I going to waste it trying to be somebody who I'm not? And that part we see so many women, we see the pain in their faces, and they have a story in their head that they just have to put up with it. I call it the golden handcuffs, in a way, whether it's a position, I have to do it for what, right? When we talk about finances, I know we're going to dig a little deeper into this, but there is an intentionality in how I help the women that I work with look at three numbers in their lives, their survival number. And this is a really important number because I say, if you can come up with this number to live a life where you can put a roof over your head, right? You can provide food and shelter, literally, and, medical needs is probably the next most important thing, you're going to be okay. And so what ends up happening, even at CEO level, I had a CEO that I work with that she was like, I can't leave my job because I'm going to be homeless. And I'm thinking, is that true? Is that really true? But it goes back to our amygdala, right? Our survival brain. It's like the worst is going to happen and you're going to end up in the street, right? While I don't disagree that that's a reality for so many people, what I try to provide is saying, what if we prepared for that? What if we said, you know what? Know your number so you're not scared of that number. That's intentionality. What's your comfort number? What kind of life do you want to live, right? How much money do you actually need to live for X number of years? Let's figure out the numbers because then we remove the emotion from that extreme, almost like shock in the system, right? The shame, the like people want to win the lottery and it's almost like this really weird like high that they get and then they don't win the lottery and it's like, oh, okay, we're back to normal life. Like, what if you actually build the number so you had exactly the life that you want, right? Instead of wishing for some other life that maybe you wouldn't even want if it actually happened, right? So, and then we have the rich number where you can just give money away, have a second home, have all these different things. And the more we know those numbers, the more we create freedom. The more we create freedom to say, you know what, this is intentional, right? If I say in this job, it's because I feel valued. I feel like I have a contribution to make, and I am okay being me in this space. And if I'm not okay being me in this space, why are you even there? Right? Why are you there? And if it's because you want to make X amount of money, ask, why do you want to make that amount of money? What is it providing? And is that worth you literally trading your life for that company? And if they don't value you, you have feet and you can leave, right? And really either create the life you want or find a company that actually values you for exactly who you are. And asking yourself, to do that reality check. Am I believing some of these stories? Am I also being the best self that I can be? Because right now, the version that some people might have of themselves is the version that's protecting themselves from this environment that doesn't want them there. But that's not their true self. And sometimes they don't even know who they are because they're so used to being told by other people who they are. Women in general are being told who they should
But
be.
there's a couple things I think we should talk a little bit more about, Dr.
Mhm.
Violeta. And so I saw this quote the other day that kind of resonates with what you're saying. And it said, "The hardest prison I ever escaped was the one I built to keep myself safe."
Yes.
And so I think about things like golden handcuffs. I also think about, and I don't know if there's a name for it, but it's similar to golden handcuffs, but it's like almost like gratitude handcuffs, right? So,
Oh, yeah. You should
when
be
you
thankful.
come from,
Mhm.
let's say, a marginalized, group, or you grew up blue collar, or you kind of come from more of like a scarcity background,
Mhm.
and then you get into a cushy white collar job, and you don't want to self advocate because you don't want to rock the boat because you're just so grateful
Yeah.
for everything you have. And then you feel like, well, I'm so grateful. I shouldn't ask for anything more because they might think I'm not grateful. And
Mhm.
like the two things are not an either or.
Right.
It can
Yeah.
be an and. You can be grateful and still ask for the things that you deserve. And it
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
invalidate your gratitude. But I think sometimes we get caught in that sort of mindset, very similar to like golden handcuffs. And it's so interesting that you talked about those three numbers because I do this something similar. So when I
Mhm.
work with clients, a lot of people right after they lose a job, let's just say they got laid off or there's been some kind of restructuring, there's this sort of panic that sets in. Like, I don't have income. How am I going to pay
Mhm.
my bills? I'm going to be homeless. Like, I'm never going to find another job. Like, there's this dialogue that kind of plays out in people's heads. And often one of the first things I suggest people do is like figure out what your floor is, which in your
Mhm.
case would be like
Mhm.
your house, your health, your food, like
Mhm.
just like what am I going to, if I were just getting by, what
Yeah.
does that number look like? Because then as you start evaluating roles again, you can
Mhm.
start saying like what trade-offs am I making, right? And when you
Right.
start thinking about total compensation packages, how does this feed those numbers that I'm trying to accommodate, right? So the floor, the sort of ideal life, and then the sort of like pie is the sky,
Mhm.
situation. And you can really start to ground those things in your values. And so we've kind of come full circle on the topics
Yeah.
because they're all so interconnected. But I think what I have noticed, even myself and with clients I work with, is many of us don't really stop to reflect on any of it.
Right. Mhm. Well, and I think that another layer, so I'll respond to what you're referring to, and yes, my husband has never asked for a raise. He's an engineer, and he's been in the company, he's been in the workforce for 20 years, and in that one particular company for 10 years. He's never asked for a raise. As a matter of fact, it's so bad, okay? But it goes back to, I'm not gonna coach my husband, you and I know we don't coach our own family members unless they ask, right? But my husband is a really, and he's Latino, and it's a very fascinating thing because he has done amazing things. He won awards this year and he got a new title, but he's like, I should be thankful for it, right? And when he compares his life to to his parents, it's almost like, I just can't even believe that I make X amount more than my parents. So that comparison is really, really problematic, right? Because we, my dad had a second grade education, right? If I compare myself to him, of course, there's a part of me that's like, and he was able to build a business that, was multi six figure. So there's this dynamic of like, who who are we selecting as our Jonases, right? Who is our comparison? And what if we didn't have a comparison? What if we said, what is that we want? What kind of life do we want to create? And what kind of money can help us create that life? Because we have the extremes and the other way around too, where I'm like, I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to be a millionaire. It's like, yes, why is that, right? So there's kind of this alignment that has to happen between the extremes of like not asking for anything, but also almost like living in the what I call the lottery ticket, life. But you don't even know why, right? Or you don't even question either of those systems. But to say, what would comfort really look like for me? And if that requires me asking for a raise, like we did a financial literacy workshop on Tuesday with my community. And one of the questions that was asked really resonated with that. It was kind of looking at, what is it that I need, that I want to live? Why is it that I want to make money? Right. And we created a wealth snap. And that's your statement that's going to remind you why you're doing that. Asking for a raise, snap it. We need a raise because my goal not only is to generate $500 right now or more, or whatever number that is, right? But to say, I want to not have to worry about paying for a vacation ahead of time. That's the reason why I want to do it for now, right? But long term, it might mean I don't want to worry about having to ask my kids when I retire, right? Whatever that is for that person. So there's this values misalignment, right? That we say we value security, we value this, yet we don't actually ask for what we need to feel like we are building our own wealth instead of relying on this income. And then the second piece that I think is also really important is that self-advocacy piece, right? That we just don't speak up for ourselves because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is we have to stay quiet or we can't ruffle feathers. My mom has this saying that it comes from such a good heart, such a good place in her heart, right? As a consultant and as a business owner, my salary fluctuated at the beginning before I actually got really serious about building a company, right? And so then sometimes I would, in passing, I'd be like, oh, I didn't get that contract. And she would get so worried. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that Juan has a stable job so he can provide for you. And I was like, wow, right? Because in her story, a man provides. In her story, and she's stuck in a different handcuff situation where my dad always provided. So she feels she can't leave him because now she's indebted to him. He provided for her all her life, for all of us as kids, and now they almost feel like they are in debt to each other. One for raising the kids, so he could never leave, and then the other because he always provided financially for her, so she couldn't leave because guess what? She doesn't have any money. So I said, "Is that true, mom?" So this past weekend I did net worth. I totally calculated their net worth, And I was like, you're a millionaire and you don't even know it, right? Because her mind is scarcity. Like if she were to get a divorce right now, right, which she would never dream of because of that debt that she has to him, she would literally be able to live just fine, right? But she just can't even imagine that reality because it's not part of what she has decided for her truth to be. So that's the second piece, right? Like, or the third piece is, what is your truth? What do you want that truth to be, and how do you make it happen?
It's so it's not, I guess it is a little funny, haha, but like I had this situation with my mom recently,
Mhm.
and so in addition to my coaching practice, I have another business that's currently exploring expansion. And I was on the phone with my mom, and I was telling her that we had secured real estate for the second location, and I was kind of laying out some of my plans and how my vision for the future for the business and all these things. And my mom, a little jokingly, a little dismissively, kind of made a comment like, okay, tycoon, you know? And so,
Right.
like, coming from her perspective, she's more often more concerned about the risk, right? So in her
Interesting.
mind,
Yeah.
I just signed a lease for another piece of real estate, and she's sort of like, well, what happens if things don't work out, right? And so
Hmm.
she's more like, it's that scarcity side of the situation.
Totally.
And I'm trying to like think big picture and like
Hmm.
vision and all these things. And so it's just really interesting about our mindsets in that particular conversation. Because
Yeah.
admittedly, I still struggle with scarcity mindset. I grew
Hmm.
up blue collar. There were parts of my childhood where we had very little, you know, and candidly, like when I started sort of stepping into the lifestyle that I was building for myself in my corporate career, there were many moments of hesitancy because I thought, well, what if the other shoe drops and all this goes away? Like
Hmm.
I will have bought a house and I, you know, we'll have these nice cars and we'll have gone on these vacations, and like what happens if I lose all of that? You know, like so like you know, those conversations still happen even when
Yeah.
good things are happening to you, when you're self-advocating, when you're taking steps in the right direction to sort of build something new. The voice creeps in every now and again and says like, well, what if this really bad thing happens?
You know what, Heather? I actually try to answer that. I'm like, what if? What if it did? Okay. And then you answer it. Like you take a piece of paper, and this is kind of, I call it like, if all shit, hits the fan kind of thing, right? So it's like, okay, what if that were to happen? And I actually walk my clients through that. And then answer it. Now that we have you, since, we're both coaches here, right? What would happen if you lost it all? What's the worst that could happen?
Well, I think first of all, there's a fallacy in there, and I can
Yeah.
say that now because I'm not as emotional about
Right.
it. But like,
Hmm.
the reality is like it all just won't fall apart, right? Like,
Right.
there's sort of a series of dominoes that like fall, and you have at any one of those points choices to make.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that's so much easier to recognize when you're sort of clear of thought is that often we get in, when we're emotional, we get into this really binary thinking, right? Like
Yeah.
it's an all or nothing situation.
Hmm.
And then when we can kind of step back and stop for a
Hmm.
second, we start to recognize that there are other options. We might not like them, but there are other options. And sometimes within those options are solutions that open up more options.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that actually happened to me late last year where there was a situation that we got into. It was very personal, very emotional, and we got into some of that binary thinking. And it was sort of funny because I had just given a presentation on like decision making in uncertain times. And so I had to sort of step back and take my own advice
Hmm.
and say, okay, you're getting into the binary thinking, but it's not that black and white. And now you need to start thinking about like what if, like how might we and what if?
Yeah.
How might we,
Hmm.
what if? And so as I worked through that over, time, it did give me not only a little bit of like emotional regulation, because it's like, okay, I do have choices here. Choices make me feel in control. Even if I'm not in control of the overall
Yeah.
situation, choices make me feel in control. And then I can start kind of taking action based on now what I know.
Yeah.
And that's how we got through, right? So it was this really sort of very personal, deeply emotional situation. Once I sort of took my own advice, I could work through the scenarios and answer the questions of like, well, what
Hmm.
if all these bad things happen?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now I have a list of things I can do. So if like this happens, then I do this. If this happens, then I do this. So,
Yeah.
if they actually happen, maybe I make a different choice, but at least I know that there are there are paths forward. And I think that gives you a lot of peace of mind and just helps you then kind of settle the emotional side of it.
Mhm.
At least
Yeah.
that's been my experience.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of things there, right? In terms of the the first one that I have to name, one is awesome. You're looking at what's possible beyond what your mother's limitations were. Because I think that I struggle with that too, constantly saying, and even talking about money. And I do talk about money in my community. I do name numbers because sometimes we think that millionaires need to look like white men or other men, right? Like whatever stereotype we have of what a rich person looks like, but it doesn't look like you and me. And so to me, it's like, wait a minute, what if we actually redefine that, right? So there's that idea of like what's possible and making sure that we live up to that. But I'm also willing on the other extreme to lose it all. Okay. Like you said, the likelihood of that happening is so small, right? But say, and this is something that is happening in our communities right now. These mass the whole threat with immigration and people getting deported and all these kind of things, right? It's been happening, first of all, right, to name it, but it feels more extreme right now because of the incoming administration, right? So, and that's a very good example of when I was 14 years old, and I don't even know how I developed this, Heather, but it was like one of those moments of like, oh, Cheetos, like, what if I literally was thrown to another country? What would I do? Like, what if that were to happen? Would I be prepared? And so the question I asked myself as a 14-year-old, okay, I don't even know how. Like I said, was like, well, if I could learn how to run a business, if I could learn how to make money, I think I'll be okay anywhere in the world. Isn't that fascinating? Because I'm thinking most 14-year-olds don't think that way. Maybe my kiddo is an exception because she's literally heading that direction. She has all these little businesses, and all these little ways to make money. And so the question is, what if that happened? What's my plan, right? And then the second thing, and I think this is goes to another book that I'm just finishing right now, and it's called How Not to Worry. And it gives you scenarios, where you can imagine you losing it all, right? And you're like, okay, I lost it all. I've done this before. I can do it again. And then you build your businesses back up, right? Then it's no longer fear, right? Then it's no longer shame because shame lives in silence. Shame is, we don't want to answer that question because it's scary, right? We don't want to talk about it. Death, we don't want to talk about. As a matter of fact, that's another exercise in the book. It's imagine whomever it is, your children, your partner, your best friend, imagine they die for a split second, right? And you ask yourself, am I living and being the person I want to be if that were to happen today? Right? Did I show up for my friend? Did I show up for my family? Did I show up for my kids the way I wanted to, knowing that they're not going to be here tomorrow? And I would say for most people, the answer is they take it for granted. They assume it's going to just happen, right? So having those moments, almost like those little flashes of possibilities, saying that, what if that happened? Who would I be? Who do I need to be to make sure I maximize my time with this person while they're here? And even for me, how do I maximize my time on earth? Because I don't even know how long I'm going to be here, but not dwelling on it so much. Like I'm going to be dying every day, right? It's more like, am I living a life of intention? Am I living my life in the way I want and not in the way that other people tell me that I should be living this life, right? So it's a couple of things, but there's so many things to it. I mean, but that's kind of how I kind of bring it back together. And it goes back to freedom and choice. And we tell the story in our heads that we don't have freedom and we don't have choice because we have to do something. And we really don't. Anything in life we do, we're choosing to do it. Even raising kids.
Yeah, it's all a story that we tell ourselves, right? And
Yeah.
some of that story is influenced by societal expectation. Some of it is cultural or family dynamic, so certain families have traditions or expectations, and so that has an influence. And then all those choices we make along the way also influence that story, right?
Hmm.
And so it's it's interesting the power of story. I mean, I it's one of those things where, like, in a lot of ways we talk about story so much that the concept has sort of lost some of its meaning, but at the same time it's so relevant, it's so impactful. And if you sit with it and you spend enough time sort of understanding your story, the stories that you tell yourself, the stories that others are telling you, like, you start to take on perspective that you didn't have before. And that's too, in my mind, is where some of that freedom and control and intentionality and self-advocacy start to come into play, because you start to recognize the sort of construct of these narratives.
And question them. Like, say, you know what is it that I believe? Like, take a moment, do a thought download. What are some thoughts that I believe about me, about my job, about my partner? I remember before going through coaching school, my husband forgot our anniversary. And I was like, we're done. He doesn't love me. We're going to get divorced today, you know? And then I kind of sat with it all day and thinking, why do I believe that? Why do I believe that love is giving me a gift when I don't even like gifts, by the way, right? Love is like remembering a day. And I'm thinking, where did I come up with that story, right? So, and then identifying, is this a story that society has written for us as women? Or is it a story that has been handed from my parents to me, or from the grandparents or society, right? And is that a story I want to keep? Because if that's a story you want to keep, that's on you now, right? To say, okay, I believe that this and that should happen, or women should do blah blah. Okay, am I going to live up to that, right? Do I want to live up to that? Like, I believe in autonomy and choice, right? Now, do all women believe in that? Probably not, right? But there's that, how do I choose what I want my story to be? And sometimes we think we need permission for that. I literally, I probably should look for it, but I have a little golden pen that I call the magic wand. And with my clients, I'm like, you have my permission to believe that, right? If you want that to be true for you, let's make it happen. Because they feel that shame that comes with, like, but what if I don't want to have children, right? What if I don't want to have a job where I have to work from, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m.? Like, how can I say yes to me and let go of that story, right? And the hard part is, it's like the comfort that some of those stories bring, like the type of lifestyle. I mean, we really look at lifestyle creep, right? As you get better jobs, your lifestyle all of a sudden changes, and now letting go of that story, it's like, oh no, I could never live without a 7-bedroom mansion and two brand new cars. And I'm thinking, what if you let go of that story? Who would you truly be, right? And then all of a sudden, all these things fall into place. So where stories come from is super important, and being curious with yourself, like, I wonder, where did that come from? Like, why is it that I believe that? Right? And sometimes I'm just like, wow, this is really fascinating, because I've never questioned it. I just accepted it. And even worse, I took it upon something that I just do naturally without even questioning it. So sometimes questioning it, even my daughter, right? We say, we don't support certain businesses if they don't align with our values, right? So my daughter is like, I don't support certain businesses because they don't align with my values. If she decides that that's part of her story, she continues it, right? But we don't question it. And she questioned my parents that other time I was telling you. And I was just like, whoa, right? She is clearly saying, this is no longer part of my story. You can continue keeping that in your story. But for me, not going to exist, right? It's not even a conversation. I know what I want for myself. And I'm just like, that is so profound, right? From a 14-year-old to stand in that truth for herself. So I think that that's another thing, which for society, because we're fish swimming in the water. We don't even know what the water has. One book that really helped me was Take Back Your Brain, and it was about how women have been conditioned to think certain things, about money, their bodies, all these different things. And you're like, oh my gosh, I think that way too, right? So it just helps bring light to, like, awareness rather, to the thoughts that we have in our head, and naming them. And then you can question it, like, is that something I want to keep? Is that something I want to pass on to my daughters and my children, right? How boys treat us, right? We just assume, oh no, when he hits you, it means he likes you. Is that a story we like? Right? And we let it happen, right? Oh, look, he's so cute. He's your little boyfriend. And I'm like, oh no, 5-year-olds don't have boyfriends. Like, I remember pushing back against those societal, and it's just cute. And I'm like, no, it's not cute. Right. And it might come across, like with my mom, it comes across a little like, ooh, it's a little harsh. And I said, it's not a story I want for my kids. So I'm going to speak up, to make sure that you understand that that's where kind of where I'm working towards. Now, she may or may not accept it, but that's on her, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just have to make it clear that this is how I am going to show up.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot, Dr. Violeta, about self, but I want to take a little bit of a transition to community, because
Mhm.
in the time I've known you, first of all, community is how I met you, but it's also when you talk about, like, an important aspect of how you built your business and how you've sort of navigated the world, community plays such an important part, not only in your journey, but also in your values. And so I really want to kind of round out our conversation now by sort of shifting gears a little bit and just talking a little bit more about the importance of community. So what I'd like to hear from you is, how do you define community, and ultimately, like, what do you think makes it meaningful? And then where do you see the role of networking in building and sustaining impactful communities? So like, how do those things kind of intersect?
Yes. So here's where my scientist brain comes in, because when we look at communities in natural ecosystems, right? We have, I mean, just look outside. You can see this, right? Trees, like they form their own communities. As a matter of fact, to the point where they don't even touch. If you really pay attention, they don't even touch. They allow enough space between the branches to not like overwhelm each other, right? So I was like, ooh, that's so beautiful, right? To just take a moment to kind of see those spaces. And so I look at nature as an inspiration for that, that communities, there is no, of course you have to eat to live. So there are animals that kind of kill each other and, make a feast out of, but that's out of necessity because that's part of the system, right? But for us as rational human beings, something we get to choose. We get to choose intentionally who we bring into community, but also not shut ourselves down to where we don't even interact with other people who don't have a perspective similar to us. And I think that that's a strength that I have to constantly remind people that not everybody's going to agree with you, but being able to actually talk about issues is super important because we are human beings sharing a planet, right? So it's kind of this very interesting space. And so the way I build community is through almost like hubs, if I look at it that way, right? When I work with my clients, I think of an ecosystem like in their own brain, between their mind, their body, their how it vibrates, and kind of what they produce in the world. They're literally their own ecosystem, and we're made that way, right? We have billion trillions of cells. We have all these organisms that live on us, right? My daughters, whenever they don't wash their face, I'm like, hey, by the way, this is what lives on your face if you don't wash it. And they're like, ew. So we are walking communities, right? Just as in, we think we're individuals, but we actually carry a lot with us, right? And even family trauma passed across generations in our DNA, right? So there's that dynamic. And then there's you and I as a interacting with each other, and your background and my background. We form a like a smaller version of a community. In a workplace, it's called a team, right? And then beyond that, it's actually like divisions and units and whatever that is. When I think of that, I definitely see different hubs. I run a couple of communities here in Denver. I help manage a network called Cafecito Denver, which is a network of over 1,200 Latina women professionals. It started 40 years ago with politics and people just wanting a space to just be themselves, come back. They would fly to DC, come back, and they would meet up for coffee Friday mornings downtown in Denver. And the community still lives on. And so that's part of, I help with the technology piece and doing all the LinkedIn and kind of promoting the community, finding women that can join that and to say, you know what, you can have a conversation. If you're in a job transition, you just want friendship, this is a place for you, right? So I manage that network. I also, as part of my membership for group coaching, we also have a membership that we offer and sell, but we actually add coaching to it. So it's a service we provide, but we also do a monthly walk, and we call it. I had to think about what is my true authentic self, right? I love coffee. I was born on a coffee farm in El Salvador, and that's like I literally drank coffee since I was born, right? And then I love to walk every single day. Part of my commitment for life was I will walk 1 mile every single day. And I thought, what if I bring those two together? What if I bring walking and community, right, together? So we have this model where once a month we bring BIPOC women together to just literally walk with one another. We do get coffee. This sometimes we have special, events here and there where it's a little bit more in depth. And when the weather is bad, we do hibernate, but it's okay. It's still community, right? So this coming weekend is going to be a little ugly. So we're just going to hibernate and share a meal and talk with one another, get to know other women. And it brings me to that last, I guess, that last piece of networking where we have intentionality in the community where we ask each other, how are you? How are you doing? What can you bring into the community? What do you need from us? Right? To just be you. And so that's part of my BIPOC network. And then of course I'm, part of all these other like amazing networks like Tara and all these other, places. But then for consultants like you, consultant people who are solopreneurs, they're in an industry where they're isolated. I saw a really huge need to bring each other. And that's where expansion towards anybody who needs the space, if you feel called to it. And I always ask, what brought you to this space today as a kickoff question? Because I know we have this need. There's a loneliness epidemic. We know it's real. So that is open to anyone in the community who wants to come. And we call those chat and connects. And we do those once a quarter because there is a need to connect with one another, to see each other's humanity. And then you get to meet people that are so different from you, right? So I love that part. And they come and go. Some people are regular, some people just show up once a year. That's okay too, right? And then we celebrate every so often. So there's this dynamic of, if you don't find the community that you want, you create it. That's kind of what I did, right? And so there's that dynamic. And now it's almost like, okay, what is too much, right? In terms of that. But I love being in community, which brings me to the next piece. Whenever I go to an event, whether it's at the chamber, whether it's other women's, groups, whenever somebody hands me a card, I will literally hand it back to them and say, I need to know who you are first, because we are such a transactional society that we think, oh, we're going to go to a networking event and here are all the cards. That is not how you build business. Business is built on trust. And if I don't trust you, I'm not going to hire you, right? And so sometimes people will say, I can't believe that you get, your clients to pay you up front. And these are like thousands of dollars. And I said, because they trust me. They know I will show up to do the work that needs to be done. And they know I will go out of my way to provide the highest value I can for what they're paying, right? Because value for me comes from me as a person, not necessarily from what I'm selling, right? I mean, that's like beyond that. And so people see that and they respond to that. And so networking has been something that I think is really a need that we have in society. There's that need for connection in a way where listening is important. So many times I just let people tell me about themselves, and then life happens, right? And then all of a sudden I see a connection. I'm like, you know what? I can see you getting to know this other person, and this how you two might be able to work together. Then I see the magic happen. It's almost like I pull myself out of the pool, and I all these people are, swimming in there, and I have that magic power to say, wait a minute, this person and that person, they need to know each other. That's my superpower when it comes to networking. And then in turn, it shows up in my business as trust, as whatever I do, people are there because they just know that whatever I produce is high quality work, right? And they're always going to get value whether they pay or whether they attend one of my free events, And I think for me, all I ask is that commitment. When you commit, like truly say, yes, I'm going to be there. And if you don't show up, literally take a moment to say, why am I not showing up? What got in the way that I felt was more important to me connecting with other people in a true, authentic way?
Yeah, a lot of what you're talking about, Dr. Violeta, is network effects, right? And so
Mhm.
I was much better about this in the corporate environment where I could stay connected to people sort of across different parts of the organization. And I knew them both personally, but also like the projects they were working on. And then if I was in a meeting and someone said, hey, we're going to be doing X, I'd be like, well, did you talk to so and so? Because they're working on Y. And there's some synergy between these projects that you're working on that the two of you didn't know were happening simultaneously, right? And so you become this connector, this sort of node of putting people and process and projects and kind of bringing things together. And so that's probably one of the things I noticed about you, because you sort of do that in the world, right? And so it's a skill set that I suppose I own, but I still need to develop on the outside. I still need to develop it on the outside. But I want to just bring that up because I think it's important for people to recognize that what you're doing to build community in sort of these other spaces, people can replicate that and it can show up in a lot of different ways. And I mentioned at the top of the show that I'm going to be launching this book club this year. And that was inspired by you, Dr. Violeta. So, I knew your story. I knew how you'd built all these different sort of community hubs and how you were connecting with different parts of the world and different people and all of these different sort of industries and channels. And I thought, well, what kind of people do I want to connect, and how can I build my own sort of ecosystem and community for that? And I thought, well, I want to read books. I want to be accountable to reading the books. I want to be able to talk to people about the ideas, because it's great when you can learn new things, but it's even better when you can share your learnings with others. And so I thought, well, why don't I just try to kind of put a group together who can come together and talk about ideas and, learn together, which is one of my values, right? Continuous learning. So very much inspired by your approach to building community.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think with that comes is we support businesses that are aligned with our values too. So we literally have a whole list of businesses that are owned by leaders of color that are own that have sustainability principles that work with neurodiverse communities. And just to create that super intentionality that you spend your dollars in the things that you say you value. And that is often in disconnect with how we truly do spend dollars. So the more you check, right, yourself to say, am I truly living a life that aligns with exactly what I believe is important in the world? And many times we don't. There's a disconnect. There's a disconnect when we say, oh yeah, we want to support local businesses, and yet we're on Amazon all day long, right? And only buy from, like, because it's a quick dopamine hit of like, yes, it's on its way, we're ready. And it's almost like this, and it might be a little more expensive sometimes. And it's like, I'm okay spending an extra dollar at this coffee shop because I know they're training young people, right? So there's this dynamic of like, how do we truly live in all aspects? Because you hit on something that I think like I do naturally because I'm a scientist. I don't even think about it, which is I see systems, right? I see systems, whether it's in community or whether it's in the work that I do, and the reason why I work with the leader and their teams, right? And their organization, because it's like you can't work on one person and not on everybody else in a way that creates true, meaningful, long lasting change, right? So then I also see all these systems. So when within yourself, ask, what are your systems supporting? Right? What's that story? Does it match up with your values? And it's just like doing a quick check here and there. And when I find myself, I'm like, wait a minute, I've ordered from Amazon. Why is it that I'm ordering from them and not from a local shop? Right? Why is it that I'm spending money here or even out of my community? I'm thinking there's so much need, right? In terms of like making sure we spend money in our Denver community, in our Denver metro area community. Why is it that I'm ordering, something from another place? And it goes back to, we're just saying, if we truly value local things, and we have to support those businesses too, right? And hire people within our networks as well. And that's really important to me.
Yeah, I feel like some of these topics, Dr. Violeta, are things that we could talk about for hours. Like, there's been so many things I didn't ask you about more because I was just like, we would be on this podcast forever if we went down all these different topics, because it's all so important. It's so interesting. It's, there are conversations that we need to be having,
Mhm.
and I'm just so grateful that we were able to have some of that dialogue. But we are coming near the end of the show. And I love to wrap every episode by saying, if someone said this episode was way too long, I didn't listen. What is one message or one idea that you'd want them to take away from this conversation?
I think that question, like, are you truly living a life that is authentic to you, a life that you want, right? And if you can't answer that question, think about the ways that you can, right? So, how are you being intentional? How are you manifesting exactly the life that you have, right? And how is what you do, right? How the people you surround yourself with, community, supporting that or keeping you away from that life that you want? I think that would be my take home.
Some really powerful questions. I would just remind everyone in the audience that we always open the show by saying it's time to own your story. Are you ready? And I
Yes.
think that that's exactly what you're posing, right? Is like, it's time to own your story. Like, let's figure out what that means for you. And then be intentional, self-advocate, like make it happen. Dr. Violeta, thank you so much for this conversation. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Heather. It was such a pleasure to see you again and to have this wonderful conversation with you.
If you enjoyed this episode and are seeking to redefine success on your own terms, subscribe to Small Acts of Rebellion and join a community that celebrates authenticity and personal growth.